Hello and welcome to the Biological Anthropology lecture series. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Tadurin. Here we explore what it means to be human, biologically, evolutionarily, and behaviorally. Let's begin our journey into the science of humanity. Welcome to Module 9, the Genus Homo. Here, we trace the emergence of early Homo, the evolution of Homo erectus, and surprising new discoveries in our lineage. This is the point in the story where our ancestors begin to look and behave in ways that feel recognizably human, yet still carry echoes of the earlier Australopithecines. In this section, we examine the unexpected discoveries and what they reveal about diversity within Homo. These species challenge many long-held assumptions about what members of our genus should look like, how they should behave, and when they should appear in the fossil record. Let's revisit what many people think they already know about Neanderthals. For decades, they were portrayed as crude, unintelligent brutes, strong but slow, destined to be replaced by smarter modern humans. But when we look closely at the evidence, that picture falls apart very quickly. In fact, Homo neanderthalensis forces us to rethink some of our most basic assumptions about intelligence, adaptation, and what it means to be human. Let's look at their bodies first. Neanderthals were powerfully built, with short limbs, broad chests, and thick bones. This wasn't clumsiness, it was adaptation. These proportions are well suited for cold environments, helping conserve heat during the glacial cycles of Ice Age Europe and Western Asia. You might wonder why this matters. It matters because Neanderthals weren't struggling to survive at the edges of habitability. They were thriving in harsh, demanding climates that required physical resilience and deep environmental knowledge. Neanderthals had large brains, often as large as, and sometimes larger than, those of Homo sapiens. Brain size alone, however, doesn't tell the whole story. Their brains were organized somewhat differently, reflecting different sensory and motor priorities. What's clear is that Neanderthals were capable thinkers. Their stone tool tradition, known as the Mousterian, shows careful planning, skillful flaking, and consistent techniques passed down through generations. These tools weren't random or crude. They were well suited to hunting, processing hides, and daily survival. Let's look at behavior, because this is where old stereotypes really collapse. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals cared for injured and elderly group members, individuals who survived long after serious injuries that would have made independent survival impossible. Think about what that implies. Care requires empathy, cooperation, and social bonds strong enough to sustain non-productive members of the group. That is not the behavior of a mindless species. There is also growing evidence that Neanderthals engaged in symbolic or ritual behaviors. Burials, pigment use, and personal ornaments appear at some sites, suggesting that meaning and identity mattered to them. You might wonder whether this makes them just like us. That's not quite the point. The point is that Neanderthals developed complex behaviors in their own way, shaped by their own evolutionary history. Finally, let's look at genetics. Neanderthals did not simply vanish without a trace. Modern humans outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA, clear evidence of interbreeding. This tells us that when these groups met, they interacted, exchanged genes, and formed relationships. Neanderthals were not an evolutionary dead end. They are part of us. So when we step back, Neanderthals emerge not as failures, but as a successful, intelligent, and deeply human lineage. Their surprise lies not in how different they were, but in how much they force us to expand our definition of humanity. Let's revisit why Homo naledi captured global attention when it was announced. Before this discovery, most researchers assumed that by the Middle Pleistocene, only hominins with relatively large brains, species like Homo heidelbergensis or early Homo sapiens, were present in Africa. Then the Rising Star Cave System in South Africa revealed something completely unexpected. More than 1,500 fossils representing multiple individuals of a small-brained yet strikingly human-like species. Suddenly, the tidy narrative of steady brain expansion looked far more complex. Let's look at the anatomy, because Homo naledi is a mosaic in the truest sense. Its brain size, around 475 to 560 cubic centimeters, falls within the range of Australopithecines, yet the skull vault has a shape trending toward later Homo. The hands tell an even more interesting story. The wrist and palm look adapted for precision grips, useful for tool-related activities, while the curved fingers suggest strong climbing abilities. You might wonder why this matters. Think about the combination. A creature comfortable both on the ground and in trees, yet capable of manipulating objects with notable dexterity. This challenges the idea that major shifts in manual skill required large brains. The body below the neck looks surprisingly modern. The long legs, human-like feet, and lower limb proportions indicate efficient bipedal walking. The pelvis and rib cage still carry some primitive elements, but overall, the locomotor anatomy suggests a confident upright walker. In other words, small brain does not equal primitive body. Let's look at the context of the fossils, because the location is as fascinating as the anatomy. The remains were found deep within a cave chamber, accessible only through narrow, twisting passages. There are no signs of predation or accidental mass death. Instead, the simplest explanation proposed by the excavators is deliberate body deposition, placing the dead in a specific location. You might wonder how a small-brained species could engage in such behavior. That's precisely the question that makes Homo naledi so significant. If this interpretation holds, it suggests that symbolic or ritual-like practices may not have been limited to large-brained hominins. The dates add another layer. Homo naledi lived between roughly 335,000 and 236,000 years ago, meaning it overlapped with early Homo sapiens. Think about that for a moment. A small-brained hominin with human-like limbs and advanced manual capabilities living at the same time as our own species. So when we consider Homo naledi, we're not looking at an evolutionary outlier. We're looking at evidence that the genus Homo was far more diverse than once believed. It reminds us that evolution explores multiple pathways simultaneously, and not all of them follow the same script. Let's revisit how Homo floresiensis was discovered, because the story itself already hints at how surprising this species would turn out to be. In 2003, researchers working in Liang Bua Cave on the Indonesian island of Flores uncovered remains that looked human in some ways, but at just over a meter tall with a cranial capacity of around 400 cubic centimeters. They didn't fit any known member of our genus. At first, some suggested they might simply be modern humans with a pathological condition, but as more fossils emerged, including additional limb bones and dentition, the evidence pointed strongly toward a distinct species shaped by island environments. Let's look at the body. Homo floresiensis stood roughly 106 centimeters tall, with limb proportions and foot anatomy that differed noticeably from both modern humans and earlier Homo erectus. You might wonder why this matters. Think about isolated islands. Limited resources often lead to dwarfing in large animals, a pattern we call island dwarfism. It's the same evolutionary pressure that produced pygmy elephants on Flores. The ancestors of Homo floresiensis were almost certainly Homo erectus, a species far larger in body and brain size. Over generations, adapting to a resource-scarce island could have driven their remarkable reduction in size. Let's look at behavior, because this is where the puzzle deepens. Despite their small brains, the archaeological record shows stone tools associated with Homo floresiensis that closely resemble those used by Homo erectus. These tools, simple flakes and chopping implements, suggest planning, precision, and a familiarity with stone-working traditions. You might wonder, how does such a small brain support this level of technological ability? The answer reminds us that brain size alone doesn't determine cognitive capacity. Organization and ecological demands also play crucial roles. The dating of the fossils adds another layer to the story. Homo floresiensis appears to have survived until roughly 100,000 to 60,000 years ago, long after Homo erectus disappeared elsewhere and well into the period when modern humans were dispersing across the globe. Picture that for a moment. While early Homo sapiens were expanding into Asia, a small-bodied, small-brained hominin, descended from Homo erectus, was still living on a remote island, maintaining its own adaptive strategies. The persistence of Homo floresiensis shows that our genus was not a single linear progression toward modern human traits. Instead, multiple hominin lineages with different body sizes, brain sizes, and lifestyles coexisted for long stretches of time. In other words, evolution was experimenting with many possibilities at once. So when we consider Homo floresiensis, we're reminded that the story of human evolution is broader and richer than the path that led directly to us. It's a story of diversity, adaptation, and the remarkable ways living beings respond to the worlds they inhabit. Now let's revisit what this section has really shown us. By placing Neanderthals, Homo naledi, and Homo floresiensis side by side, a clear pattern emerges, not of orderly progress, but of diversity. Neanderthals remind us that large brains and complex behavior did not belong exclusively to Homo sapiens. Homo naledi challenges the assumption that brain size dictates behavioral sophistication, and Homo floresiensis demonstrates that long-term evolutionary success does not require large bodies, large brains, or global expansion. Together, these species dismantle the idea that human evolution followed a single, predictable path. These cases force us to abandon the old ladder model of evolution. There was no straight climb from primitive to advanced, no simple rule that bigger brains meant better solutions, and no neat sequence where one species vanished before the next appeared. Instead, multiple species of Homo overlapped in time, occupied different ecological niches, and solved survival problems in very different ways. Let's look briefly beyond the three species we focused on. Denisovans, known primarily through ancient DNA, reveal that hominin identity can be traced through genetics and introgression, not just bones. Homo luzonensis adds another example of island endemism in Southeast Asia, while Homo rudolfensis reminds us that diversity was already present near the very origin of the genus Homo. Homo heidelbergensis sits uncomfortably between categories, likely ancestral to multiple later lineages, and Homo antecessor complicates the story of early Europe. Emerging evidence for Homo juluensis suggests that Asia, too, hosted more hominin diversity than we once assumed. So, when we step back, the message is clear. Human evolution was not a single story, but many stories unfolding at once, and understanding that complexity brings us closer, not farther, from understanding ourselves. First, let's revisit the journey we've taken through this module. We began with Homo habilis, a small-bodied, big-potential hominin experimenting with tools, diets, and new ways of interacting with its environment. Then we followed Homo erectus, whose long legs and growing ingenuity carried our genus across continents, transforming human evolution into a global enterprise. And finally, we explored the surprising branches of the family tree, Neanderthals, Homo naledi, and Homo floresiensis, species that challenged our expectations with their unexpected mixtures of ancient and modern traits. Think about this. Across just a few million years, the genus Homo produced toolmakers, travelers, climbers, island specialists, and even small-brained hominins that may have engaged in complex behaviors. You might wonder why this matters for understanding ourselves today. It matters because it shows that our lineage was shaped not by a single direction or a single definition, but by diversity, by the ability of different populations to solve different problems in different environments. Now, this part is important. The evolution of Homo is not a story of inevitable progress toward Homo sapiens. It's a story of experimentation, adaptation, and resilience. Each species we encountered contributed something to our understanding of what hominins were capable of, whether it was endurance walking, precision gripping, controlled fire, or unexpected forms of social behavior. As we close this module, remember that human evolution is not only about where we ended up, but about the many paths explored along the way. Thank you for joining this lecture. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Taduran. I hope this session deepened your understanding of biological anthropology. Keep exploring what it means to be human. See you soon.